Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit today about free will. But I want to put in a little bit of a disclaimer. Some people say, don't start something unless you can finish it. That's dumb. Half a job is better than nothing. Very rarely can you make something perfect. We say that perfection is the enemy of the good, and that's true. If you demand of yourself perfection, there are lots and lots of good things you won't do. Free will particularly is a very, very difficult subject. In general philosophy, it's a very difficult subject. In Jewish philosophy, it's a difficult subject. I want to introduce the idea and then take a few slices which have practical applications. But I know there's more to say. I know there are objections that I'm not considering. I'm aware of all that, but I think it's worthwhile getting something on the table anyway. So first of all, free. Free always means free from something that would disturb you. A free product means you don't have to pay for it. Political freedom means the government won't stop you from doing things that you want to do. Friction-free device means there's no friction. So when we say free will, what is it free from? And the right answer, I think, is it's free from external causation. Nothing outside of you causes you to do what you do. Now, the word cause is a very strong word. It means makes it happen, determines it, necessitates it. All by itself, it brings about the result. That's what causation means. I'm stressing that because we're not denying that external factors influence free will. We're not denying that. But influence is one thing, and causation is something else. Let me give you an example of why this is important, and also an example of what I mean. The reason why free will is important is because free will is the basis of responsibility. That's very vague, and I made it vague on purpose, as you'll see, because there are all sorts of nuances. Well, let's take a couple of examples. George is standing at the head of a flight of stairs, looking down. On the landing below, there's a 5th century Ming vase worth about $250,000. Peter sneaks up behind George silently and gives him a push. George tumbles down the stairs and smashes the vase. The owner of the vase comes running over and says, "What did you do? You smashed my vase, $250,000. And he says, "I didn't do anything. Peter gave me a shove. I just rolled down the stairs." I think we expect the owner of the vase to withdraw his complaint against George. Maybe he should go chase Peter and do something to him. But since George didn't choose to smash the vase, it was unrelated to any choices he ever made in smashing the vase, so he has no responsibility for it. Now here's another case. Let's suppose that George is a heavy smoker and he wants to kick the habit, and he's using various means, including post-hypnotic suggestion. Every Thursday night, he goes to the hypnotist, puts him under a spell and says, "The next 7 days you're not going to smoke." I mean, either it works or it doesn't. It's not foolproof, but that's what he does, and he pays him. One Thursday night, on a whim, the hypnotist says, "Next 7 days you're not going to smoke," and also, on Monday morning at 10 a.m., your right hand is going to swing out in front of you like this. Exactly 10 a.m. That's what the hypnotist says, on his own. Well, Monday morning, George is getting a tour of his friend Philip's Chinese treasures. And at 9:59, he's standing in front of the pedestal on which there is a 5th century Ming vase worth $250,000. And then the grandfather clock in the corner bongs the hour of 10. And George's hand swings out and smashes the vase. And his friend Philip says, "What did you do? Are you crazy? You smashed my vase." And George says, "I don't know what I did. I have no clue. It happened by itself. It just, my hand went out by itself. I've never done anything like that before. I can't imagine why it happened." Is George guilty for smashing the vase? Clearly not. It was the vicious suggestion of the hypnotist who programmed, I'm assuming the hypnosis works, maybe it doesn't work. For philosophy, it doesn't matter. We're making up an example. And it happened, he couldn't have anticipated it. He couldn't have stopped it. It's totally unrelated to him as a person who makes decisions. And therefore we would say he's not responsible for it. Maybe the hypnotist bears some indirect responsibility. He didn't know that George would be standing in front of a vase, but he did give him a hypnotic suggestion to do something dangerous. Maybe he bears some responsibility, but George has no responsibility because it wasn't related to his free decision. Now, if you extend this, you'll see that this commits us to a certain picture of how the world works. There are people who will tell you that you are nothing but a machine. Everything you do is programmed into you. The programming is a result of your DNA, plus all the environmental influences that you have had before birth and since birth. And all of that completely programs everything that you do, so that when you do something, you're just a machine following its program. That's what they'll tell you. Don't be afraid, and don't feel under duress. They haven't got any good reason for thinking that. I'm telling you. One thing you should have in your pocket when somebody tells you something like that, say, what is your evidence that that's true? And then I think you will find a very embarrassed response. Evidence is certainly not sufficient to draw that conclusion. But I'll leave that aside for a moment. What can we say about that? Well, if it were really the case that your DNA and your environment program you, then when you do something, it's not the result of your free will at all. Indeed, you don't have any free will. Free will meant free from external causation. And here, you have external causation that covers the ground. The DNA that came from your parents, plus the environment that interacted with you, and that programmed what you do. You're not doing it on your own. You have no free will. Then we would say you're not responsible for anything that you do. And that's, of course, a shocking result. And the philosophical world is all awash with debate about this. Should we say that the world really does determine what you do? Does it matter? There are hard determinists and soft determinists, and it's a long, complicated story. But this is our position. Without responsibility, you're not without free will, you're not responsible for what you do. Therefore, free will is very important to us. There's an explicit verse in the Torah, see, I have set before you life and death, good and evil, therefore choose life. The Torah says, Uvahart avahaim, that means you can choose. It wouldn't be telling you to do something that you can't do. So the Torah really rests on this principle, an assumption that there is such a thing as free will. The Rambam, in chapter 5 of Ilchos Tshuva, where he talks about this, says, without free will, and you'll see that he's using what I just told you, without free will, punishment would be unjust. How can you punish someone for something that his body brought about if he didn't have any free will to do otherwise? Yes, his body was the cause of its happening. So was George tumbling down the stairs, the cause of the smashing of the vase. He was the cause of it, all right. Then there was a cause behind him. Peter pushing him. But if everything you did was like tumbling down the stairs, then you wouldn't be responsible for anything. And then punishing someone who's not responsible is unjust. That's the way you avoid punishment. You say, I couldn't have done otherwise. You want to punish somebody, a good defense is, what else would you have had me do? And if you can't answer that question, then the punishment is unjust. So the very fact that we have punishment as a predicted outcome of certain types of actions means we are presupposing that we have free will and therefore we're responsible. The Rambam adds also a more subtle point. What about reward? Does reward presuppose free will? And the clear answer is yes or no. Well, on the one hand, I can give somebody a gift if I want. There's nothing wrong with that. Give somebody something he hasn't earned, that's called a gift. Not unjust, not morally objectionable to give people free gifts. But because of the fact that he has no free will, he didn't earn it. And if he didn't earn it, it's not reward. The word reward means that he's done something to earn it. And if he has no free will, then he hasn't earned it. So even the concept of reward doesn't apply. Furthermore, if people were really determined in that way, there'd be no point, as Maimonides puts it, for the prophets to say, if you repair your ways, then God will show favor to you. And if you don't repair your ways, then you're sunk. The prophet is exhorting the people to make better choices. If they don't make any choices at all, there's no point in doing that. So the Torah, lives on the basis of this assumption that there's such a thing as free will. Now, let's take a look at free will in practical terms. How much free will do we have? And is all free will equal? So let's see. Free will is the ability to decide between alternatives. How many alternatives do we have? Well, one thing that limits our alternatives is our knowledge. There are things to be done that no one's ever discovered, no one's ever thought of. Compare our free will with the free will of the people 1,000 years ago. They just didn't know that certain things were available, and therefore it wasn't one of the alternatives that they had. Knowledge can increase the free will that you have by giving you more alternatives. And knowledge can do the opposite. Because when you choose what to do, you're thinking of what the consequences will be. Well, suppose it's discovered that one of the things you used to do has terrible consequences. Then your knowledge will remove that alternative. You won't want to do it anymore. So knowledge will change the scope of the free will that you have. So with your abilities, you have certain physical abilities now. As your life goes on, you'll acquire new physical abilities, lose old physical abilities. Your abilities will decline as you get older. Then your free will changes because the range of choices that are available to you change. Then let's take the free will that you have. When you say you have the free will to do X and the free will to do Y, does that mean that the free will is equal in the two cases? Are there no important distinctions between them? Well, let's take 3 examples. Take a person who serves idols. That's a no-no, right? We're not allowed to do that. In one case, everybody's doing it. I can't be different from everybody else. And I want friendship and I want likes on my Facebook account. Not to mention friends on my Facebook account, all of which is phony. So he serves the idol. Second case, one of the priests of the idol religion comes to him and says, here's your choice. Serve the idol or I burn down your house. Wow. That's serious. Burn down my house? Not supposed to do it. Yeah, but lose my house? That's a tough choice. Third case. This time he comes with a gun. Bow to the idol or I kill you. Now, does he have free will in all 3 cases? Even in the case where the guy puts a gun to his head and says, bow to the idol or I kill you, does he have free will? Of course he does. How do you know? Because throughout history, hundreds of thousands, not millions of people have said, shoot, I'm not doing it. This doesn't mean that everybody would have free will. Some people could go into a panic and become paralyzed. That could happen. But many, many, many people with guns to their heads have said to the person with the gun, shoot, I don't do that. And of course, as you very well know, I'm not only talking about Jews. I'm talking about non-Jews also. Or people in wartime. Someone's captured and the enemy says, reveal where your fellow soldiers are. He says, no, kill me, I won't do that. So in all cases, you have free will. But the amount of responsibility that the free will gives you is different in the different cases. We have a rule: if a person is threatened with death, if he does not serve an idol, and he loses the battle, and he bows to the idol, he doesn't get punished. Even if two witnesses are standing there and say, listen, Reuven, we're watching you, and idol worship is a capital crime, and it's something you're required to die rather than do. And we'll report you to the court if you do the wrong thing. And Reuven says, I hear you. I know. I'm aware of all this. But I can't die. I just can't do it. I can't die. And he bows to the idol. When the witnesses go to the court and report him for worshiping an idol, he'll get no penalty. No penalty. It's a capital crime, but not when there's a gun to your head. Corporal punishment? Not at all. The spiritual punishment of being cut off from God doesn't apply. Why? Partly because, there's more to say, partly because although he has free will, the choice is a very, very difficult choice to give up your life rather than do that. Now, if someone fails at a very difficult choice, a choice where doing the right thing is extremely difficult, is that a big failure or a little failure? Let me put it in colloquial terms. Suppose it was something that if you do it, you're a hero, and you fail. Is failing to be a hero a big failing or a little failing? It's a little failing. Hero is top of the lot. It's the best possible. Okay, I qualify for 96.5%. I'm happy with that, thank you very much. I think I have a good, successful life. It wasn't 100%. Okay. 96.5 is not something to be ashamed of. The failure to get the last 3.5% isn't a big failure. It's when the challenge is an easy challenge and the person fails, then he should be embarrassed. Even that you couldn't do? Even that you weren't able to overcome? Like the first case of the idol worship. Everybody's doing it, I'll get likes on my Facebook account. If that's your excuse, then it's a gigantic failure. By the way, this idea is codified in commentary on the Talmud. We wear tzitzis, and the tzitzis are white. Well, as you also know from the Shema, originally there was a blue thread, or 2 threads, or 4 threads, some blue threads that you're supposed to put in the tzitzis. We don't have the right dye, so we don't do it anymore. The Mishnah Menacha says, perfect tzitzis are blue and white, but if your tzitzis are all blue, it's kosher. If your tzitzis are all white, it's kosher. Either way, it's kosher, just not ideal. So the question is raised, what's worse? To have all blue tzitzis or all white tzitzis? Neither of them is ideal. Both of them are kosher. Which is the worst failure? To have all blue tzitzis or all white tzitzis? You have a clue?
Did Korach say something about having all blue tzitzis? Did he ask some kind of question like that?
I'm sorry, say again?
Korach, didn't he ask a shaila?
No, he said if the whole garment is blue, you shouldn't need tzitzis at all. That's a different question. You're right. It's a good association, but it's not the same question. Well, ask yourself this question. If it's all blue, what are you missing? If it's all white, what are you missing? Let's start with white. If it's all white, you're missing blue. How bad is it to be missing the blue? The blue is very expensive. It's very expensive. This guy says, yeah, I know, okay. But $200 for a couple of blue threads? That's a lot of money, I know I should do it. I should make the best mitzvah, but $200? I can't do it. Okay, now compare with a guy who has all blue. What is he missing? White, which costs 16 cents. He wasn't willing to spend 16 cents to make the mitzvah perfect. Isn't that much worse? This guy wasn't willing to spend $200. Okay, money is something, and he's losing the battle. But $200 is something which could be a drag on someone. But 16 cents? Didn't even bother to spend 16 cents. That's much worse. So the amount of resistance that there is to doing the right thing determines how much responsibility you have when you do the wrong thing. If the right thing to do is very difficult, with a lot of resistance, then failure is much less serious than failure when it's an easy thing to do. Now, are we together so far? This is clear? Okay, so now this raises an extremely important point, which if we internalize it, we'll look at other people in entirely different ways. Let's suppose I see a person do something wrong. Well, there are two things to think about. What did he do? Why was it wrong? What law did he fail to fulfill? Or what law did he break, on the one hand? And what's the status of him as a person, him as an agent in failing to do the right thing? And from what I've told you, it should be clear that knowing the law won't be good enough to answer that question. Because the first thing we'll have to ask is, how hard was it for him to do the right thing? You have two people who make the same failure, and one person's guilt will be very severe, and the other person's guilt may be very limited. Because for the first one it was very hard, and for the second one it was very easy, or the other way around. So there's a big difference between judging a person's action and judging the agent. And our sources tell us that only HaKadosh Baruch Hu can judge the agent. Because to judge the agent, you have to know his psychology. You have to know where he's coming from. And if you don't know that, you can't judge the agent. That's a very, very important idea of not judging other people. One Mishnah says, don't judge your friend until you get to his place. So, some commentaries explain as follows. You saw what he did, but you weren't living in his shoes. You didn't have the alternatives that were facing him. And until you live in his shoes, until you see where it was for him, you can't judge him because you don't know what it was for him. Maimonides says that people are judged on a ratio of their good deeds to their bad deeds, but it's not judged on the basis of counting them up numerically. How many good ones? 463. How many bad ones? 295. Okay, good majority. It's not done that way. Because you can have one good deed that outweighs many bad deeds, and you can have one bad deed that outweighs many good deeds. Depending upon what the motivation and the obstacles and the temptations are for each of the deeds, you have to add all of that up. And he says, the only one who can weigh up the agent is, he gives a title to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kel Deos. Kel Deos is a quote from a verse. Hannah was married and had no children. And her husband had another wife named Penina. And Penina really gave it to her. If you were really serving God in the appropriate way, then he wouldn't be doing this to you. He wouldn't be doing this to you. You must be a phony. You must not be really serving God. And she criticized her and berated her and embarrassed her. And then she had one child. The name of that child was Shmuel, Samuel the prophet, who was compared to Moses and Aaron. And when Hannah, pours out her feelings in poetry, prophecy, she says, and Kel Deos, God who knows the inner psychological reality of each person, he will know whether Penina really meant it for my benefit or she didn't. So the Rambam takes that title for God and says, only Kel Deos can weigh up the evaluation of the agent because only God knows the psychological reality within the agent. Now, as I said, this is a good protector against judging other people, because you don't know their inner psychology. But I think it works even deeper than that. I don't think we know our own psychology either. Because I think, as Chazal say, Adam korav etzel atzmo, a person is not objective in his own case. And it's not only because we're very lenient to ourselves and we rationalize, we're also over strict. We're over demanding. We're overtaxing on ourselves. So our self-evaluation is distorted. And here the practical result is you need to really share what's going on in your life with someone whom you can trust, someone who has deep encyclopedic Torah knowledge, and someone who will take the time to get to know you so he can help you evaluate where you are, what you're doing, what you should be doing, what you could ask from yourself, what you could not ask from yourself. Often people contemplate taking a step forward, and because of fear or laziness decide not to do it, whereas an experienced person could tell them that you shouldn't have been afraid. And sometimes they demand of themselves things which are unreasonable, and they berate themselves when they don't succeed. Now, if you've done sports seriously at all, then you're familiar with this. I exercise regularly, Baruch Hashem, but I had a trainer many years ago, 15 years ago. That's a lot of years for you guys. And I had both sorts of experiences with him. At one point in time, I was running 3 miles in a half hour. That was part of my workout. And the trainer said to me, I think you could do 4.5 miles in 45 minutes. That's a 50% increase. I think I was 60 years old. I said, really? I mean, you think I should do that all in one shot? Maybe I should work up to it over 3 weeks or something? He said, no, I think you could do it. So I said, okay, you're a trainer. Next time I came to exercise, I did it. It wasn't spectacularly hard, actually. He saw in me much greater capacity than I appreciated. And I realized, since I was only going to run for a half hour, by minute 27, I was already tired, because only 3 minutes to go. And my whole psychology was to be tired. And then when I said, no, it's going to be 45, so 27, it was, okay, but I got a ways to go. I just kept going. I was shocked. On the other hand, he told me that the phrase that you will hear from people, no pain, no gain, is deadly. If you're in pain, stop, because the pain is telling you you're risking injury. And if you injure yourself, you won't be able to train at all. So don't do that. Don't do that. Only for stretches is some pain appropriate, and as my present trainer says to me, on a scale of 0 to 10, shouldn't be bigger than 5. If it's bigger than that, you're injuring the muscle, and then it won't recover enough time for the next session, and you'll have trouble. So there are people with the experience to tell you what your own capacities are better than you yourself will understand. There is this prejudice in some quarters. No one can know me as well as I know myself, because I'm with myself all the time. I have infinitely more data about myself than other people will. That's true, but you don't have the ability to understand the data about yourself. Someone who's seen hundreds of people like you has a general picture of how people are and what their experience is and what you can expect for their future, and he can very well know many things about you that you don't know about yourself. So confiding in such a person and taking counsel with such a person is an extremely important feature of being able to know what you should do, what you can do, and what's realistic. And in this regard, I have 2 suggestions for acquiring this self-knowledge. I don't know that this is all of the possibilities. You should ask other people. One way of getting self-knowledge is, as I said, confide in someone who can give you counsel about and give you a better, more realistic picture of your own abilities. And the other is this: if you are considering to take a step forward, this could be in Jewish observance or other areas of life. I think this piece of advice is generally a good piece of advice. Instead of thinking, well, shall I commit to this or not? think, I'm going to try it for a month and see how it goes. I'm only experimenting. And then after a month, I'll make an evaluation as to whether I'm really ready for this or not. That means that if after the month you decide that you're not ready for it, you haven't failed. You haven't even made a mistake about yourself because you were only decided to explore, and that decision was right. It was right to explore. And now you got your results and you can act on it. If you make a commitment and fail, that causes a certain amount of self-doubt. I made that commitment and I failed, so I don't really understand myself that well, so I can't trust my commitments, and that works against your enthusiasm for the whole project. But if you accept it as an experiment, you don't have that outcome. And this is absolutely crucial, when you make that evaluation after the month, remember to make a bottom line evaluation. Not just what it is that you are experimenting with to try to accomplish, but even if you accomplished it, what were the costs? So I'll give you an example. Davening is at 7:30, you get up at 7:10, have a quick coffee, go down and be there for 7:30, and you daven. Then you have your day. Somebody says, you know what? I heard about this. If you spend an hour learning before davening, that's a very good thing to do. Well, it is. There's no question about it. It's a very good thing to do. Okay, so instead of getting up at 7:10, I'm going to get up at 6:10. Yeah, and then learn for an hour and then daven. It'd be wonderful to start the day with an hour of learning. And I'm sure it'll influence by davening. Wow, what an idea. Yeah, I think I'm going to try it out. Okay, so the month goes by, every morning, 6:10, out of bed. And he's there at 6:30, and his friend is there, they learn, and they daven. It's terrific. But what happens at 9 o'clock at night? He used to go to bed at 10:30. And he was tired at 10:30, and that was the end of his day. Now, 9 o'clock at night, somebody says, you know, I'm having trouble with the Rashi. Could you help me? He says, not really. I'm getting up at 6:10. No, I don't want to tell him, but still. No, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And the person's irritable and cranky and has less time and patience for other people. So it comes to the end of the month, he has to say, okay, I was up for the extra hour, got the extra hour of learning in the morning, but it cost me at night. Maybe on the whole, I'm not gaining anything. Maybe on the whole, I'm losing something. That's what I call a bottom line evaluation of the entire results. And that's a perfectly acceptable thing to do, because Kadosh Baruch Hu knows that we don't have infinite psychological capacities. We have limited psychological capacities. Okay? Are we together so far? Now, let me ask you this question. So we have free will, and even when we're under terrible stress, we have free will. There are cases where a person can lose it. Like I said, a person puts a gun to his head and he just freezes. I was told that in the Second World War, when the American troops landed in Europe and they had to fight, when they went to the first battle, 10% froze. That's not good, because you're a standing target for the enemy, you know? It's not really... So then they assigned psychological officers and they tried to improve it. You can lose your free will. Nothing that never happens. It can happen. But usually, it doesn't happen. So, suppose Kadosh Baruch Hu is in a situation like this. Kadosh Baruch Hu, for one reason or another, needs Reuven to make a certain choice. Well, Kadosh Baruch Hu is running the world. He can, now listen carefully to my vocabulary, he can force Reuven to do it. He can't force him to make a choice. That's a contradiction in terms. But he can force him to do it. Turn him into a robot. Just program him to do it. Could the Kadosh Baruch Hu arrange that Reuven will do what the Kadosh Baruch Hu wants him to do without taking away his free will? How could he do it? Yes, he can do anything. But I didn't ask, listen carefully, I didn't ask, can he do it? I said, How could he do it? I said can, he said yes. So I said, well, how could he do it? Give me a strategy whereby Kadosh Baruch Hu could get Reuven to do it without taking away his free will. Yeah.
Putting in harder circumstances.
Okay. It's even you can do it simpler and more absolute than that. Let me give you an example. I'm going to play the role of the person with power. I know that Reuven's going to the ice cream store, and I know that his preferences in ice cream are vanilla, chocolate, strawberry. I don't want him to buy vanilla. I don't want it. So I have two choices. One is to follow him to the store. When he gets out of his car, I walk up behind him, put a gun in his head, and say, Reuven, chocolate. Chocolate or death. Now listen carefully. There, it's right for him to buy the chocolate. Nobody's going to die for the sake of vanilla ice cream. The right thing for him to do is to buy the chocolate. So that's one way to get it. But that's by applying force to Reuven. But here's another way. I get in my helicopter, and I arrive at the ice cream store 10 minutes before Reuven gets there, and I buy up all the vanilla. And now Reuven walks in and says, give me 2 quarts of vanilla. And the guy says, there was this crazy guy here. He came in a helicopter, and he bought 167 quarts of vanilla. But I have chocolate and strawberry. What'll it be, chocolate or strawberry? Is he making a free choice? Sure, he's choosing between chocolate and strawberry. And he chooses chocolate. But he doesn't have vanilla available anymore. So by manipulating the circumstances, HaKadosh Baruch Hu can change what's available, or he can change the consequences of the actions so as to change the types of motivations that apply, and he can get Reuven to do what he wants him to do without taking away his free will. Now, does this work in every possible case? Well, I'm a philosopher, I'm a logician. I have not been able to describe all possible cases and check for all categories of possible cases whether this is always available. But it's available an awful lot. An awful lot. And this is a terrible story, which I think is a true story. A guy who got all hundreds in his final course in physics in high school, and he applied to graduate school. This was in college. He applied to graduate school, and he was refused for every graduate school. Couldn't understand it. He had top grades, top recommendations. He went to check his grades at the registrar. Well, in the registrar's records, there are 2 digits for the grades. So the hundreds were registered as 0. So the sheet of his grades that was sent out in this course, he got 0. So they didn't take him. Isn't that tragic? Nobody gets 100 on every exam, except for this guy. You need 3 digits? For all the guys who are going to get 2 digits, I need another digit, another roll of paper for him. Yeah, you do, but they didn't think of that. Right? See, if he had got 195 and then he had 99.97, everything would have been fine. But he didn't have it that way. So, and there was another case where a person made an application, and the pile of applications was sitting on the desk, and the window was open, and the wind blew off the top application. They found it later, after the incoming class was, the application got lost. Too bad. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu has available vast ability to manipulate the circumstances so as to get the person to do what he wants, even if he doesn't take away his free will. So people talk about, if we have free will, then we can sort of run the world, and since HaKadosh Baruch Hu is committed to our freedom, he can't change it, he can't manage it, he can't supervise it. That's very, very superficial because of his ability to manipulate the circumstances of choice. Now, you probably are too young to remember when computers were young. They used to have, write your own story, and it would come up with alternatives. You can do this or this, and when you do this, then you get that alternative, And there are forks in the road, and you choose what fork that you want. And of course, when you choose this fork, only these are available to you now. Had you chosen this fork, then these would have been available. So each choice puts you in a position where only certain other choices are available. And that's natural. That's the way life works. So in a certain sense, you can understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu's management of the world in general, and of your life in particular, as determining the choices that face you, which then determine the path of development that's available to you. And it's very difficult to predict. I just was talking to someone, I don't really know, but he told me that he came to Israel on his way to Europe. I guess it was 40 years ago or more. And he was on his way to Europe, and it was Friday, and someone said to him, "What are you doing for Saturday?" He says, "I don't know." He says, "Well, we have an institution here that takes people in and gives them housing and enables them to, experience some Jewish living." Okay, fine, On Monday I'm going to Greece, but I have Saturday off. So he was taken to a yeshiva for beginners or people without background, and he stayed there 5 years. That choice of going with the fellow to the yeshiva put him on this track rather than that track. Never got to Europe, stayed here, came from, got married, went back to work, and came back here. It was an entirely different life. So Kadosh Baruch Hu sort of puts us in these choice circumstances, and they are designed to enable us to take the next steps. And sometimes they circle around. In other words, you take a step and it leads you to a certain type of direction, and that direction doesn't work out, so you circle around and start over again. All of that is choice by choice determined by the response that the Kadosh Baruch Hu gives you. This is all part of what we call Hashgacha Pratis, individual divine providence, in which we believe. Now, finishing a book on the subject. And this is how the divine providence is set for you. So when you have a circumstance in life which puts certain choices in front of you, you have to sort of feel that this was presented to you by the Creator who wants your best. He wants you to develop in the best possible way. And if you have that in mind, perhaps that will guide you to make the best decision that you can. Okay, now there's one other thing that I want to mention which is very important. I was very careful with my words at the beginning when I said free will is the foundation for responsibility. I didn't say you perform an action if your free will was why you did that action, then you're responsible. And if it wasn't your free will that was responsible, that caused you to do the action, then it wasn't responsible. I didn't say that. I didn't say it because it's not true. Foundation is a broad term, it's a broad concept, and it has some indirect consequences. I'll give you an example. There's a very bitter advertisement that was on Israeli radio. I don't know if it's still on. I heard it like 20 years ago. When you go out to the party, make sure you give your keys to your friend. That's what friends are for. Got it? Going to the party, you're certainly going to get drunk. But then, you might drive your car when you're drunk. Don't do that. Give your keys to your friend, because that's what friends are for. Okay, now let's imagine a person who doesn't give his keys to his friend. He gets drunk, gets behind the wheel, he's driving, and he smashes into something, and he's held responsible, and he's liable, and they're going to charge him with driving under the influence and so forth and so on. And he says, I didn't choose to do that. I didn't choose to do anything. I was blind drunk. I was on automatic pilot. How can you hold me responsible for smashing the car when I didn't choose to do it? The answer is you're not only responsible for what you choose, you're responsible for the consequences of what you choose. And if your choice makes you later incapable of choosing, you'll be responsible for all those things that you do when you're not capable of choosing because you chose to become incapable of choosing. So he is responsible because his prior choice put him in that condition. And the same thing holds true, and now I'm quoting from Rav Dessler, in the opposite side. Let's suppose a person is struggling with a problem. Many children steal. It's quite common. Usually, they steal for a certain period of years, and then they outgrow it. Some outgrow it by coming to a realization, something's wrong here. You know, most of the people I know don't steal, and I wouldn't want somebody to steal from me. And there are laws against it, and my parents tell me not to steal. You know, I don't seem to be in a very good position. And they struggle with it, and they overcome it. So let's say he starts stealing when he's 8, and he overcomes it when he's 14. Now he's 19. And he's going to buy treats for Shabbos. He's in the candy store, and the proprietor gets a sudden call. The proprietor walks out, leaving him alone with the candy. Wow! He could fill his pockets and run! But, you know, that doesn't appeal to him anymore. That was behavior for a 13-year-old, not for a 19-year-old. 19-year-olds don't do that.
Going through the cashier.
Yeah, today, right. They put a chip in your ear. To photograph the iris in your eye, you know, they'll trace you to Timbuktu. So he has outgrown that bad tendency, partly through his own effort to resist it. He's created in himself a good habit, the habit of being honest and not stealing. Now, at 19, he's not even tempted. You don't have free will to make a choice for something for which you're not tempted. You need to have motivation pulling you in two directions in order to be able to make a free choice between those motivations. If all your motivations are on one side, it's not a free choice. I've spoken about that before. I'm not going to go through that again, but them's the facts. So here, now when he's honest, he's on automatic pilot. But he programmed his own automatic pilot. Says Rav Dessler, he gets credit for his honesty for the rest of his life. Every honest decision that he makes, he gets decision because it was he gets credit because it was the consequence of free decisions that he makes. So just like the free decision that the guy made not to give his keys to somebody else, and he ends up driving drunk and he smashed, we say you're responsible for the smashing because you decided not to protect yourself against it. So when the person programs himself to have good habits, he's responsible for the good habit, and every time the habit operates, he gets more credit because he programmed it in himself. And this leads to a picture of human development, which I think is very important and not very popular. I don't think people have thought of it. A person approaches the age of maturity, which isn't 12, it's really 35. No, okay, it's a little younger than that. And he's thinking about himself and his options, where he is in life, and he realizes, my life is not ideal, and I do things that I shouldn't do. Yeah, but there's quite a few of them, actually, and I can't work on all of them at once. Some of them, I think, I couldn't work on at all. They're just out of control. I have a problem with anger. It's beyond me. And then, let's say there are 4 other ones which could be improved. I have enough psychological strength to improve 2 of them, but not all 4. So I have to set priorities. It means my psychological strength to win the battles and to create new habits is limited. Now, if that's true, and it's true that the other ones I can't handle them, I don't have the free will to handle them, then I'm not responsible for the failures. Because there my free will doesn't reach. So I'm not responsible for the failures. But now, when I, let's say, handle the 2 out of the 4 that I can't handle, and I create those habits, that takes 2 years, and now that's finished. It doesn't require my effort because I already created those habits. Now I can work on the other 2. Gradually, I become more and more responsible for my life because gradually the scope of my free will expands to cover more of my life. So whereas when I start my responsible life, maybe 80% of what I do is out of my control, and therefore I'm not responsible for it, Decades later, I might be responsible for 80% because 60% I've programmed and the other 20% I'm using my free will for. So you become more and more responsible for your life as time goes on. I think that's a terrific idea of what you're doing when you're growing and when you're thinking about your options and how to develop, that the development gives you a kind of cumulative control of your life and responsibility, and if you're doing the right thing, then you get credit for what you're doing. Now, the final thing that I want to say about free will, I myself realized this only recently. Maybe this is obvious to everybody else, I don't know. But it was a bit of a jolt, and it's something worth thinking about. The world to come is where everything's good. Everything's good. In this world, there are good things, and there are bad things, and the bad things are here in order to enable us to achieve the good. That's a long story, which I'm not going into at the moment. And now, if I look at this world, and I ask myself, what things in this world are really good, absolutely good, permanently good, the criterion should be, well, the things in this world that remain in the world to come. Because the world to come is the ideal world where everything is good and it's all of the good. So then, I think, is there free will in the world to come? And the answer is no. That means that free will isn't part of the ideal good, the perfect good, the absolute good. Because when I'm in the world to come, where that's the environment, free will won't be there. So then I have to understand that free will is a means. It's not an element in the human being that gives him his value, that gives him his importance and his uniqueness. It's an element which, having used it for a period of time, will create in him something of value, something of uniqueness, something of importance, and that thing that it creates is what's essential to the human being, not the free will itself. That's what you get from looking at this world with the eyes of the world to come and saying, well, see what things in this world remain in the world to come, and those are the things of ideal value. So I think that as important as free will is, it's important as a means, not as an end. And here, there are people who think ends are really important and means are much less important and trivial. That just ain't so. There are means which are as important as ends. How important is oxygen? How important is oxygen? I don't know if I'm going to be breathing in the world to come, and I don't breathe to live. I mean, I don't live to breathe. I breathe to live. I don't live to breathe. I breathe to live. So, how important could oxygen be? Very important, because without it, you're dead. So it's very important. Means can be very important, and some ends, perhaps. I don't know if our philosophy would agree with this, but some things that are ends for some people could be fairly trivial because they're very small. Maybe we wouldn't share that. But at any rate, means can be very, very important, but they're only means. And that implies that when you ask, well, what is the importance of this thing? The answer is, look what it produces. Look what it produces. And in the case of free will, that's true in spades. If you want to see a source on it, though it's not an easy source to read, the second chapter of The Way of God by Luzzatto, where he talks about what the importance of free will is. It makes free will the history of having used free will makes us similar to the Creator. And that similarity to the Creator is our ultimate success. So it's the having exercised free will that makes us similar to the Creator in that respect. So that's the idea of free will in terms of importance, but it's important as a means rather than as an end. So these are some introduction to some of the features of free will. Any questions left over? Yeah.
With regard to the previous subject, can the Rabbi give an example of one subject in one life that he's not responsible for?
Sure.
In the context of what you spoke previously, like the more
The bomb is going to go off. There's a thing that stops the bomb, and it's 100 yards away, and there are 3 seconds to get there. I can't get there in 3 seconds. I'm just not fast enough to get there.
But maybe one can think, as the Rabbi mentioned before, with the decision making with the fork, one can think like a few steps before, and not to be in a dangerous area when there's a bomb.
Well, here I'm talking about stopping the bomb. I could stop the bomb and save other people, right? You know, come on, you're living in Israel. You know the bombs are flying in from everywhere. It's not, but that's not the point. The point is that to say that it's not in my fear, it doesn't mean that 2 weeks ago I couldn't have done something to be in another place now. That's not what it means not to have free will. It means here I am in these circumstances, and then something needs to be done, and I haven't got the ability to do it. It doesn't give me freedom because 2 weeks ago I could have been, in another continent. That doesn't mean I have free will here. Free will means these are the circumstances. Can I do what needs to be done? There are lots of things that we don't have the ability to do. The Gemara says we don't have control over memory. We don't have control over memory. A good memory is a divine gift. If you try, maybe God will give you the gift, but you're not in control of it. You can't make it happen. And I tested that.
There are methodologies to improve and to remember,
There are people who are born with tremendous memories. I made summaries of whole tractates. I put them in notebooks. I put them on the shelf. 10 years later, I picked it up, and I didn't remember that I made the summary. Not only didn't I remember what was in the summary, I didn't remember that I made the summary. I write notes in the margins of the svarim that I have. Sometimes I can't understand what I was writing. I don't know what I meant. So there are things that are beyond your control. Of course, there are things that are beyond your control. There's no question about that. Okay.